She's deaf, Davies, not daft. Just bring the water. Julian's ice-cold voice sliced through the Ethel guard's hushed atmosphere. His mother, trapped in her silent world, hadn't even flinched at the manager's clumsy attempts to communicate. Poor woman. But I knew her secret. They all thought she was helpless. Truth was, Elena Vance saw more than anyone suspected. Rage bubbled, thick and hot. Someone needed to remind them all that silence wasn't stupidity. I did something reckless, something that could cost me everything. A small, defiant act of kindness, a bridge built of sign. They have no idea how her quiet compassion will change everything. With a single gesture, she would bridge a silent gap, unlocking a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a love no one saw coming. What she did next didn't just earn her a tip. It exposed a dark secret and changed her life forever. Stay with us to uncover the shocking truth. The Ethelgard restaurant, nestled on the 52nd floor of the Four Seasons in Manhattan, was a place where silence was a commodity. It was the quiet hum of immense wealth, the muted clinking of Christopher silverware against Bernardo, China, the hushed negotiations that could shift global markets. For Emily Petrova, however, silence was something else entirely. It was the language of her home, the world of her younger sister Sophie. Emily moved through the symphony of the elite with a grace that belied her exhaustion. At 24, she wore the invisible weight of responsibility like a second skin. Her waitress uniform, impeccably starched, was a costume she wore to hide the reality of her life, a cramped apartment and Queens overdue bills, and the constant gnawing worry for Sophie, who had been born profoundly deaf. Every dollar Emily earned from these patrons, who spent more on a bottle of Chateau Margaux than she made in a month, went towards Sophie's specialized education and medical needs. Tonight, the restaurant was electric with the presence of a titan, Julian Vance. At 35, Julian was the CEO of Vance Global, a sprawling tech and real estate empire he had inherited and ruthlessly expanded. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, with eyes the color of a stormy sea that missed nothing. He was rarely seen in public, and even more rarely seen with family. But tonight was different. With him were two stern-faced business associates and his mother, Elena Vance. She was a vision of old-world elegance in a Chanel tweed jacket, her silver hair styled perfectly, a string of pearls at her neck. But her beauty was framed by a profound, almost tragic stillness. While the men around her spoke in low, important tones, Elena's gaze drifted towards the window, overlooking the glittering tapestry of the city, a queen in a soundless castle. The restaurant's manager, Mr. Davies, was a bundle of nerves personally overseeing the Vance table. "Mr. Vance, your usual?" he asked, his voice dripping with deference. Julian nodded curtly, not looking up from his phone. "And for my mother," he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. "The sea bass, no salt, steamed vegetables." Mr. Davies turned to Elena with a practiced, overly bright smile. He leaned in and spoke loudly, enunciating each word as if speaking to a child. "Mrs. Vance, would you like some water?" Elena didn't flinch. She simply continued to look out the window, her expression unchanged. A faint blush crept up her neck. A tell that Emily, an expert in the subtleties of the non-hearing world, recognized instantly the sting of being treated as invisible and incompetent. Julian's jaw tightened. "She can't hear you, Davies. Just bring the water." The words were clipped cold with frustration. He hated this part. The public awkwardness, the well-meaning but clumsy attempts by others that only highlighted his mother's isolation. Since a severe illness had stolen her hearing a decade ago, their world had shrunk. He could give her anything money could buy, except the one thing she truly missed: effortless connection. Emily watched from her station, her heart aching with a familiar pang. She saw Sophie and Elena's dignified silence. She saw the countless times teachers, shopkeepers, and even family members had shouted at her little sister, assuming volume was a substitute for understanding. She saw the slow, painful process of a vibrant personality retreating behind a wall of silence, not because they couldn't communicate, but because the world wouldn't learn how. Mr. Davies skewered away, flustered. The two associates at the table exchanged a quick, uncomfortable glance before launching back into a discussion about a hostile takeover. Julian put a hand gently on his mother's arm. She turned to him and he began to speak, exaggerating the movements of his lips. It was clumsy, basic lip reading, a language they had never fully mastered. He was trying to include her, but the effort was visible. The connection strained. Emily felt a pull, a reckless impulse she knew could get her fired. Mr. Davies had a strict rule. Never engage a guest unless spoken to, especially not a guest like Julian Vance. But the image of Elena's loneliness overrode her fear. It was a professional risk, but a human imperative. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and walked towards the most powerful table in the room. The air around it felt charged, a bubble of immense pressure. The business associates fell silent as she approached. Mr. Davies, spotting her from across the room, froze, his eyes widening in horror. Julian Vance looked up, his stormy gaze, instantly locking onto her. A silent question laced with annoyance in his eyes. "We don't need anything," he said, his voice a low dismissal. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't look at him. Her focus was entirely on the silent woman at the table. She gave a small, respectful bow of her head, and then lifting her hands, she moved them with a fluid, precise grace that was as natural to her as breathing. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance." She signed a warm, genuine smile gracing her lips. "My name is Emily. It is an honor to have you dining with us tonight. I hope the view is as beautiful to you as your presence is to this room." The world at table 7 stopped. The two associates stared, their mouths slightly agape. Julian Vance's face, a mask of controlled power moments before, was now a portrait of pure, unadulterated shock. But the most profound reaction came from Elena. Her eyes, which had been distant and clouded, snapped into sharp focus. She blinked as if seeing for the first time in years. A wave of disbelief, then dawning wonder, washed over her features. Her posture straightened, the years of quiet resignation falling away. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she raised her own hands, her fingers moving with a slight tremble, as if retrieving a long-lost skill. You speak the language of my hands." She signed back, her expression one of breathtaking astonishment. How in that moment the quiet waitress had shattered the billionaire's world, not with a loud bang, but with the profound, earth-shaking power of a silent conversation. The air hung thick and still. The hushed symphony of the Ethelgard had ceased, and for a few stretched seconds the universe seemed to revolve around the silent, eloquent dance of hands at table 7. Julian Vance stared, his mind, struggling to process the scene. He had spent a fortune on the best iologists, the most advanced hearing aids, and even tutors for himself in a desperate failed attempt to learn American Sign Language, ESL. Yet here, in his own preferred restaurant, a waitress in a standard-issue uniform was communicating with his mother more effectively than he had in a decade. Emily, keenly aware of the 4 pairs of eyes fixed on her, kept her focus solely on Elena. She felt a connection to the older woman, a shared understanding that transcended the vast chasm of their social and economic statuses. "I learned from my little sister Emily," signed her movements, fluid and expressive. "She has a smile just as beautiful as yours." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. It wasn't just the communication, it was the content. In a single sentence, Emily had seen her not as a deaf woman, not as a billionaire's mother, but as a person with a smile. She had paid her a compliment that landed directly in her heart, unmediated by a well-meaning but clumsy interpreter or a scribbled note. Elena's hands moved more confidently now, a story pouring out of them. "My husband, he learned from me after I got sick, but he passed away 5 years ago. Since then, it has been so quiet." She gestured to her son, a look of love tinged with sorrow on her face. Julian tries, but his hands are made for building empires, not for conversation. Julian watched a complex storm of emotions wearing within him, amazement, guilt, and an unfamiliar flicker of hope. He saw his mother's face animated and alive in a way he hadn't seen since his father's funeral. The sadness that usually clung to her, like a fine mist, had lifted, replaced by a radiant glow. He had been trying to fill her silence with things art, travel, luxury, when all she had needed was a voice. Emily responded with gentle empathy. "Silence can be a lonely place, but it can also be a garden where beautiful things can grow if someone knows how to tend to it. Before Elena could reply, Julian finally found his voice. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his tone no longer dismissive, but laced with an urgent curiosity. Emily finally turned to him, her professional demeanor clicking back into place, though her heart was still pounding. "My younger sister Sophie was born deaf, sir. It's our language at home, Mr. Davis," was now hovering nearby, wringing his hands, his face pale with anxiety. He was certain he was about to lose the Ethel Guard's most valuable client. He opened his mouth to apologize to drag Emily away, but Julian silenced him with a single sharp gesture. "Leave her," he commanded, his eyes never leaving Emily. He then turned to his associates. "Gentlemen, I believe we're finished for the evening. My driver will take you wherever you need to go. We'll conclude our discussion tomorrow." It was a clear dismissal. The men, though surprised, gathered their things and left with quiet efficiency, sensing the seismic shift that had just occurred. The table was now empty, save for Julian, Elena, and Emily, who stood uncertainly unsure of her role. "Please," Julian said, his voice softer now. "Sit." He gestured to one of the empty chairs. "Sir, I can't. I'm working," Emily stammered, acutely aware of Mr. Davies's panicked expression in the periphery. "You're not," Julian stated simply. "As of this moment, you are my guest." He looked over at the terrified manager. "Davies, add a $1,000 tip to my bill for every staff member on duty tonight, and send a bottle of the 98 Krug to the table for my guest." Mr. Davies blinked, stunned into submission by the sheer audacity and generosity of the command. He simply nodded and fled. Emily, overwhelmed, slowly sank into the plush velvet chair. It felt like sinking into another reality. Elena beamed at her, her entire being soothed with a joy that was palpable. She reached across the table and patted Emily's hand. "Tell me about your sister," Elena signed. For the next hour, a conversation unlike any other unfolded. Emily, initially nervous, soon found herself at ease, translating between a mother and son who were in many ways meeting for the first time. She told them about Sophie's mischievous sense of humor, her passion for painting, the financial struggles of affording a school that catered to her needs. She spoke of the beauty and complexity of ASL, how it was a language of not just hands but of the face, the body, the soul. Julian listened, mesmerized. He learned more about his mother's inner world in that hour than in the past 10 years. He learned she felt like a ghost in her own life, that she hated the pity in people's eyes, that she missed debating politics with his father and gossiping with her friends. Through Emily's graceful interpretations, Elena's vibrant, intelligent personality emerged from its silent prison. He also found himself watching Emily. He noted the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she listened to his mother, the passion that lit up her eyes when she spoke of her sister, the quiet dignity that radiated from her. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth or his power. In this moment, she was the one in control, the one holding the key to a world he had been locked out of. As the evening drew to a close, Julian knew that a simple, extravagant tip would be an insult to what had happened. This wasn't a service rendered, it was a miracle. He had an idea, a proposition so audacious it was taking shape in his mind even as he spoke. "Emily," he said, leaning forward, "I have a proposal for you. It's unconventional. It would require you to leave this job." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She thought of her precarious finances, of Sophie. "What kind of proposal, sir?" "My mother is the honorary chair of the Vance Foundation's annual charity gala. It's in 2 weeks. It's the most important social event of her year, and for the last 5, she has dreaded it. It's a night of smiling and nodding while feeling completely alone. I want you to be her personal companion and interpreter for the event. Not just for the event itself, but for the 2 weeks leading up to it. Fittings lunch is planning. I want her to experience it fully with you by her side." He paused, letting the scope of it sink in. "I will pay you $50,000. Emily's breath caught in her throat. $50,000. It was more than she made in a year. It was Sophie's tuition for the next 3 years. It was a lifeline so magnificent she could barely comprehend it. Before she could even respond, Elena, who had been watching Julian's lips and catching the gist, turned to Emily, her eyes pleading. "Please say yes." She signed her hands, trembling with hope. Please be my voice. Looking at the hopeful face of the elegant older woman and thinking of the future it could secure for her sister Emily, knew she had no choice. Her life, which had been a predictable struggle just hours before, was about to be turned completely upside down. Yes, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'll do it. The following Monday, Emily's life transformed from the gritty reality of Queens to the ethereal fantasy of the Upper East Side. A black Cadillac Escalade, the kind she'd only seen in movies, picked her up from her modest apartment building, much to the astonishment of her neighbors. The driver, a stoic man named Arthur, addressed her as Miss Petrova and handed her a coffee and a croissant from a bakery, where a single pastry cost more than her daily tips. Their destination was the Vance residence, a palatial penthouse overlooking Central Park. As Emily stepped out of the elevator, directly into the private foyer, she was met with a world of polished marble, soaring ceilings, and museum-quality art. A formidable-looking woman with a severe bun and a crisp uniform introduced herself as Mrs. Davenport, the head of household. Her gaze swept over Emily's simple dress and worn-out flats with a flicker of barely concealed disapproval. Mrs. Vance is waiting for you in the solarium, she said, her tone as starched as her collar. Emily was led through vast, sun-drenched rooms that felt more like art galleries than living spaces. It was beautiful but sterile, a gilded cage. She found Elena in a glass-walled room filled with orchids, a book lying unread in her lap. When she saw Emily, her entire face lit up with a genuine unreserved joy that instantly warmed the chilly opulence of the penthouse. You came, Elena signed, rushing to greet her. I was afraid I had dreamed it all. I am here, Emily signed back, a smile spreading across her face. And I am very real. Their first task, according to the itinerary Julian had sent, was a fitting for the gala. Emily had assumed she would accompany Elena to a dress shop. She had not assumed the dress shop would come to them. Within the hour, a team from Oscar de la Renta arrived, wheeling in racks of breathtaking gowns that shimmered with silk satin and intricate beadwork. As Elena tried on dress after dress, she and Emily conversed animatedly in ASL. Emily described the colors and fabrics in poetic detail, her hands painting pictures of sapphire blue like the deep ocean, and silver beadwork like a spiderweb covered in morning dew. For the first time, Elena wasn't just being dressed. She was part of the creative process, sharing her opinions, her preferences, her memories. This one, she signed, stroking a gown of deep emerald velvet, reminds me of a dress I wore on my first anniversary with my husband. We danced all night under the stars in the garden. While they were absorbed in their world, Julian Vance made an unexpected appearance. He had cleared his morning schedule, an unprecedented act to oversee the preparations. He stood in the doorway, watching the scene unnoticed for a long moment. He saw his mother not as the fragile, silent figurehead of his company, but as a vibrant woman, laughing, her hands flying as she shared a memory with Emily. And he saw Emily sitting on a small stool, her expression one of complete focused engagement, her presence a calming anchor in his mother's silent world. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name. It was a mixture of gratitude and a strange, unfamiliar envy. Emily had connected with his mother in a way he never could. She had unlocked a part of Elena he thought was lost forever. It seems the preparations are going well, he said, finally making his presence known. Emily started slightly, her professional guard snapping back into place. Mr. Vance, yes, your mother has chosen a beautiful gown. Elena turned to him, a brilliant smile on her face, and signed to Emily. Tell him I feel like myself again. When Emily translated, a flicker of emotion crossed Julian's stoic face. That is good to hear, Mother, he said, his voice a little rough. But not everyone in the Vance orbit was so pleased. Later that day, Julian's cousin, Marcus Thorne, arrived at the penthouse. Marcus was a senior VP at Vance Global, a man with a practiced smile and eyes that were always calculating. He handled the family's philanthropic endeavors, including the Vance Foundation. He found Emily and Elena in the library going over the gala's guest list. He greeted his aunt with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek and then turned his full, assessing gaze on Emily. So, you're the miracle worker? He said, his voice smooth as silk, but with a sharp edge underneath. Julian can't stop talking about you. I'm just helping Mrs. Vance prepare for the gala, Emily replied politely. Of course, Marcus said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. It's a wonderful opportunity for you. A real Cinderella story. The words were complimentary, but the tone was laced with insinuation, as if he were already writing the narrative. A poor girl from Queens, a vulnerable, wealthy family, and a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. He watched her for the rest of the afternoon, a silent, scrutinizing presence. He saw the easy rapport between Emily and his aunt, the genuine affection that was already blooming, and he didn't like it. For years, Elena's silence had made her passive, a figurehead he could easily manage. An empowered, engaged Elena, with a direct line of communication to the outside world, was a variable he hadn't accounted for. That evening, Marcus went to Julian's office. She's very charming. He began casually pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter on Julian's desk. Emily is professional and excellent at her job, Julian corrected, not looking up from his paperwork. Oh, I'm sure, Marcus purred. But don't you think this is all a bit fast? This girl comes out of nowhere conveniently possessing this one rare skill that gets her into the inner sanctum. We know nothing about her, Julian. For all we know, this could be a setup. She could be anyone. She's a waitress who loves her sister. Julian said, his voice firm. I saw her file from the restaurant. She's been working 2 jobs for 6 years to support her family, or that's what she wants you to believe. Marcus counted, leaning against the desk. A sob story is the oldest trick in the book. A woman this beautiful, this poised, she doesn't just happen to be a waitress. I'm just saying be careful. You're bringing her into our family's most important event. A lot is at stake. Julian finally looked up, his gaze cold. My mother is happy. That's all that matters. But as Marcus left, a seed of doubt had been planted. Julian was a man who trusted no one, who built his empire on anticipating threats and mitigating risk. He had made this decision with his heart, an organ he rarely consulted in business. Marcus's words, slick and poisonous, tapped into his deepest protective instincts. Was Emily Petrover really a godsend? Or was she just the most clever grifter he had ever met? He pushed the thought away, but it lingered a dark shadow in the corner of his mind. The 2 weeks leading up to the gala were a whirlwind of activity that felt like a lifetime to Emily. She spent her days in the Vance penthouse, a world so removed from her own that returning to her small Queens apartment at night gave her a strange sense of vertigo. Her bond with Elena deepened with each passing day. They were no longer just employer and employee. They were friends. Emily learned that Elena had been a formidable history professor at Columbia. Before her illness, a sharp-witted intellectual who missed academic debate more than anything. In turn, Emily shared stories of Sophie showing Elena the vibrant abstract paintings her sister created, a form of communication all her own. Elena, using Emily as her bridge, began to re-engage with her life. She started making calls via a video relay service with Emily, interpreting to old friends she hadn't spoken to in years. She even held a small luncheon for the foundation's board members. Marcus Thorne was present, his smile as polished and insincere as ever. He watched Emily's every move, his scrutiny a palpable weight in the room. During the luncheon, Elena, with Emily's help, brought up a specific charity. The foundation supported an underfunded school for deaf children in the Bronx. Marcus, she signed her movements sharp and direct. I reviewed the quarterly reports. Our donation to the Bronx Iology Center was significantly less than we pledged last year. Why is that? Marcus was momentarily flustered. Aunt Elena, we had to reallocate some funds to a more pressing capital campaign, a new wing for the art museum. It was a simple budgetary adjustment. The children's education is not an adjustment. Elena countered, a fire in her eyes that Emily hadn't seen before. It is a priority. I want to see the full financial breakdown. Marcus's smile tightened. Of course, I'll have my assistant send it over, but he shot a look at Emily, a flash of pure venom that was gone as quickly as it appeared. In his eyes, this was her fault. She had given his passive aunt a voice, and now she was asking inconvenient questions. Julian, meanwhile, found himself creating excuses to be at the penthouse more often. He would work from home, setting up in his study, with the door open, listening to the distant imagined sound of their silent conversations. He saw the profound change in his mother. She was no longer a ghost haunting the hallways of her own home. She was its queen reborn, and it was all because of Emily. His admiration for her grew, but so did the seed of doubt Marcus had planted. He couldn't reconcile the warm, genuine woman who treated his mother with such tenderness with the calculating opportunist Marcus described. Yet his cousin's warnings echoed in his mind. He was Julian Vance. People had been trying to get to his family's fortune his entire life. Why would Emily be any different? One afternoon, he found Emily alone in the library, sketching in a notebook. "What's that?" he asked, his voice startling her. She closed the book quickly. "Nothing, just doodling." He moved closer, his curiosity piqued. "Let me see." Hesitantly, she opened it. The page was filled with a stunningly detailed sketch of an orchid from the solarium. It was a work of professional quality. "This is more than doodling," he said, genuinely impressed. "This is a real talent." Emily blushed. "I wanted to be a botanical illustrator. I got a scholarship to Pratt, but life happened." She didn't need to say more. He knew life meant her father's death, the subsequent debts, and her all-consuming responsibility for Sophie. They stood in silence for a moment, the space between them charged with an unspoken intimacy. He was seeing another layer of her, another abandoned dream sacrificed for her family. "You're a remarkable woman, Emily," he said, his voice low. The compliment hung in the air, warm and sincere, and it terrified her. She was starting to see past the billionaire tycoon to the man underneath the lonely son who loved his mother fiercely, but didn't know how to reach her. She was beginning to feel something for him, a dangerous, impossible flutter of attraction. This was a job, she reminded herself fiercely, a temporary, high-paying job. Getting emotionally involved was a catastrophic mistake. "I should go check on your mother," she said, pulling away and leaving the library, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm. The day before the gala, the final piece of the puzzle arrived, a velvet box from the jeweler Cartier. Inside was a breathtaking diamond necklace. A note from Julian read, "A thank you is not enough. Please wear this tomorrow." Emily stared at it, horrified. The necklace was probably worth more than her apartment building. It felt less like a gift and more like a brand marking her as his property. It was the pretty woman fantasy, and it made her deeply uncomfortable. She was not a project or a purchase. At the same time, a private investigator hired by Marcus Thorne delivered a file to his office. It contained everything about Emily Petrova, her family's financial ruin after her father, a gambling addict, took his own life, the mountain of debt he had left behind, the foreclosure on their family home, the multiple high-interest loans Emily had taken out to keep Sophie in her school. Marcus smiled. He didn't see a story of struggle and sacrifice. He saw a narrative he could twist. To a cynic like Julian, this wasn't a history of resilience. It was a portrait of utter desperation, a woman that desperate would do anything for a $50,000 payday and the chance for a much bigger prize. He picked up his phone and called his cousin. "Julian," he said, his voice grave. "We need to talk. I have some information about Emily Petrova, and you're not going to like it." The Vance Foundation Gala was held at the New York Public Library. Its hallowed halls transformed into a celestial wonderland. Crystal stars hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a soft, ethereal glow on the city's most powerful and influential figures. The theme was giving a voice to the voiceless, a cause that for the first time felt deeply personal to the Vance family. Emily felt as though she were walking through a dream. She wore the emerald Oscar de la Renta gown, which fit her as if it were spun from magic. After a long internal debate, she had decided to wear Julian's diamond necklace. To refuse it would have seemed ungrateful and caused an awkward scene, but as it rested against her skin, cool and heavy, it felt like a beautiful leash. At her side, Eleanor Vance was the undisputed star of the evening. She was incandescent. With Emily as her seamless interpreter, she moved through the crowd not as a silent observer, but as a commanding presence. She engaged in a spirited debate with a senator, shared a laugh with a famous actress, and held a long, heartfelt conversation with the parents of a deaf child the foundation had recently supported. People who had only ever offered Elena polite, pitying smiles were now seeing her for who she was, brilliant, witty, and formidable. Julian watched from a distance, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his expression unreadable. He had received Marcus's information that morning. He'd read the stark, damning facts of Emily's financial desperation. Every word from the private investigator's report confirmed his worst fears, painting a picture of a woman backed into a corner capable of anything. Marcus's poisonous whispers, "She's playing you, Julian. She's playing all of us," had been echoing in his head all day. Yet as he watched her now, he saw no trace of a con artist. He saw grace, empathy, and a fierce intelligence. He saw her place a reassuring hand on his mother's arm before a difficult conversation. He saw her eyes light up as she translated a funny story. He saw the genuine, unforced bond between the two women. His head and his heart were at war, a brutal, silent conflict raging within him amidst the glamour and champagne. He finally approached them, his public mask of cool control firmly in place. "Mother, you are the belle of the ball," he said, kissing her cheek. Elena beamed and signed to Emily. "Tell him it's because I have my voice back, because of you." When Emily relayed the message, she looked at Julian, and for a fleeting second their eyes met. In his, she saw a flicker of the warmth from the library, but it was quickly extinguished, replaced by a cold, distant storm. Something was wrong. Later, as the orchestra began to play, Julian did something that sent a ripple of murmurs through the room. He walked directly to Emily. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice a low command. Emily was stunned, but she couldn't refuse. He led her to the center of the floor. As he put one hand on her waist and took her other hand in his, an electric current passed between them. For a man who seemed so cold, his touch was warm and firm. They moved together in a silence that was different from the one she shared with Elena. This was a tense, heavy silence filled with unspoken words. "You've done an incredible job tonight," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion she had expected. "My mother is happier than I have ever seen her. She's an easy person to be around," Emily replied softly. "She just needed a chance to be heard." "And you gave her that," he said. They twirled the diamonds at her throat, catching the light. He looked at the necklace and his expression hardened. "That looks beautiful on you." "It's an extravagant gift, Mr. Vance." "I'm an extravagant man," he countered. "I always pay for value." The words hit her like a slap. Pay for value. He was talking about her as if she were a commodity, a service he had purchased. The magic of the evening began to curdle. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a transaction. As the dance ended, Marcus approached them, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Julian, a word. It's about the foundation's accounts." He glanced at Emily. "An internal matter." Julian nodded. "Emily, would you please make sure my mother has everything she needs?" It was a dismissal, a cold, clear line drawn between them. She was staff. He was the boss. The brief, fragile connection they had shared was severed. Heart sinking, Emily returned to Elena's side. But as she watched Julian walk away with Marcus, she saw Marcus hand him a thick file, and as Julian opened it, she saw his face darken, his jaw clenching so tightly a muscle jumped. He looked from the file directly at her, and his eyes were no longer stormy. They were frozen tundra. In that moment, Emily knew Marcus had done something. He had taken her life, her struggles, her desperations, and he had twisted them into a weapon, and that weapon was now aimed directly at her heart. The gala concluded in a flurry of air kisses and promises to connect. Emily escorted a tired but deeply happy Elena back to the penthouse. The older woman hugged her tightly before retiring for the night, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, my dear." She signed her touch gentle on Emily's arm. "Tonight I was not invisible." The words should have filled Emily with pride, but instead they coated her heart with a layer of dread. She knew what was coming. The moment the door to Elena's suite closed, Julian's voice cut through the silence of the grand living room. "My office now." It was cold, sharp, and stripped of all warmth. The friendly employer, the intrigued son, the man she had danced with all were gone. In their place stood the ruthless CEO of Vance Global. Emily followed him into a cavernous office lined with dark wood and leather-bound books. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside the atmosphere was glacial. Julian didn't sit behind his massive desk. He stood in the center of the room, turning to face her. The file Marcus had given him held tightly in his hand. $50,000, he began, his voice dangerously quiet. To you that must seem like a fortune, enough to solve a great many problems. Emily's blood ran cold. Mr. Vance, I don't understand. Oh, I think you do, he sneered, tossing the file onto the polished surface of his desk. It slid open, revealing photos of her rundown apartment building, copies of loan agreements with her name on them, a detailed report of her family's crushing debt. I understand perfectly now. Marcus was right to be suspicious. I was a fool to ignore him. He began to pace his movements like those of a caged tiger. Let me see if I have the story right. A young woman, beautiful and clever, drowning in debt, left by her gambling father. She's desperate. She's working dead-end jobs, barely keeping her head above water. Then one day, the golden goose walks into her restaurant, a reclusive billionaire and his deaf mother. What a stroke of luck. Every word was a poisoned dart. Emily stood frozen, her face pale, the beautiful emerald gown suddenly feeling like a costume for a fool. It wasn't like that, she whispered, her voice trembling. I saw your mother was lonely. I just wanted to help. Help! He let out a short, bitter laugh. You saw an opportunity. You played your part perfectly. The caring, empathetic waitress. You knew that getting to my mother was the quickest way to get to me. You preyed on her loneliness. You preyed on my guilt. He stepped closer, his stormy eyes boring into hers. The stories about your sister, the sketches, the fine surprise at the close, the jewelry. It was a masterful performance. Tell me, Emily, what was the end game? Were you hoping I'd keep you on permanently, marry you? Did you think you could sign your way into the Vance family fortune? The cruelty of his accusations stole her breath. He had taken every genuine moment they had shared, every piece of her life she had hesitantly revealed, and twisted it into something ugly and manipulative. He wasn't just firing her, he was assassinating her character. Tears of anger and hurt stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She lifted her chin, her own gaze turning as hard as his. You think because you have money, everyone without it must be a thief scheming to take it from you? She said, her voice shaking but clear. You can't imagine that a person might do something out of simple human kindness? Because that's not a currency you understand. You deal in transactions, Mr. Vance. So let's make one. She reached up and with trembling fingers unclasped the Cartier diamond necklace. The weight of it vanished from her skin. She walked to the desk and placed it carefully on top of the damning file. This is yours, she said, her voice gaining strength. And as for the $50,000, you can keep it. I did a job. I gave your mother a voice for 2 weeks, but I will not be paid for being accused of being a monster. My dignity is not for sale. She turned and walked toward the door, her back straight, her heart shattered into a million pieces. My driver will take you home, Julian called after her, his voice still rigid, though a flicker of uncertainty now crossed his face. Her reaction wasn't what he'd expected. He had anticipated tears, denials, pleading, not this cold, proud fury. Emily paused at the door, but didn't turn around. Don't bother, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. I know my own way out of the gilded cage. She walked out of the penthouse, leaving Julian Vance standing alone in his silent office, the glittering necklace lying like a dead thing on a pile of carefully curated lies. He had protected his fortress, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just evicted its only ray of light. The silence that descended upon the Vance penthouse in the days following Emily's departure was heavier and more profound than ever before. Julian had what he wanted. The potential threat was neutralized. The fortress was secure. Yet there was no victory, only a hollow, echoing emptiness. The first crack in his certainty came from his mother. The morning after the gala, Elena emerged from her suite, her face alight, and immediately looked for Emily. When Julian explained through clumsy lip-reading and written notes that Emily's contract was over, and she wouldn't be returning. The light in his mother's eyes died. She stared at him, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and then to a cold, unfamiliar anger. She picked up a notepad and wrote in sharp, furious script. "You sent her away, the first person who has seen me in 10 years, and you drove her off. What did you do, Julian?" "It was for the best." "Mother, the situation was complicated." She didn't accept his vague explanation. For the first time in years, Elena fought back. She refused to leave her suite. She canceled her appointments. The vibrant, engaged woman from the gala retreated once more behind her wall of silence. But this time, it was not a prison of circumstance. It was a weapon aimed directly at her son. Her silence was no longer lonely, it was accusatory. Julian's resolve began to crumble under the weight of it. He reread the private investigator's report. On the surface, it was a damning portrait of desperation. But Emily's final words haunted him. "You can't imagine that a person might do something out of simple human kindness." Her pride, her refusal of the money, the raw, wounded fury in her eyes. It didn't align with the actions of a calculated gold digger. A con artist would have cried, negotiated, fought for the money. Emily had simply walked away, taking only her dignity with her. Driven by annoying unease, Julian did something he hadn't done in years. He went to Queens. He didn't send a driver or an investigator. He drove himself his Mercedes, looking comically out of place on the street where Emily lived. He didn't go to her door. He went to the small bakery on the corner, the one whose croissant his driver had bought for her. He spoke to the elderly woman behind the counter. "I'm looking for some information about a resident here, Emily Petrova." The woman's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Who's asking?" "A former employer," Julian said. Her expression softened. Emily, a good girl, a hard worker, such a heavy weight on such young shoulders. Over a cup of coffee, she told him the real story. She told him how Emily had nursed her own mother through a long illness. She told him how Emily tutored neighborhood kids for free. She told him how after her father's death, Emily had sold every valuable thing she owned, not to pay off his gambling debts, but to keep her younger sister in the special school that was her entire world. "That girl's heart is pure gold," the baker concluded, "even if her pockets are empty." The story was a stark contrast to the narrative Marcus had spun. This wasn't desperation leading to deceit. It was sacrifice born over love. Shaken, Julian returned to his office, his mind racing. Why would Marcus go to such lengths, hiring a PI, twisting the facts to discredit Emily? The answer came to him with the chilling force of an epiphany. Elena's question at the luncheon, the Bronx Iology Center. He bypassed Marcus entirely and went straight to the Vance Foundation's CFO. "I want a full, unredacted audit of all charitable disbursements managed by Marcus Thorne for the past 5 years," he commanded, "and I want it by morning." The results were catastrophic. It was a slow, systematic pattern of fraud. For years, Marcus had been siphoning money from the foundation. He would approve large grants to legitimate charities, but a portion of the funds would be routed through a series of shell corporations straight into his own offshore accounts. The charities he targeted were always the smallest, the most under-resourced places, like the Bronx school organizations, without the power or resources to question a shortfall from a benefactor like the Vance Foundation. The motive was suddenly terrifyingly clear. Marcus needed Elena to remain a silent, passive figurehead who simply signed what was put in front of her. Emily, by giving Elena her voice back, had become the single greatest threat to his entire criminal enterprise. When Elena started asking questions about the Bronx school, Marcus panicked. He had to discredit Emily to remove her from the equation to make her seem like the villain. So Julian would cast her out and the problem would be solved. The betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just about the money. Marcus, his own flesh and blood, had actively worked to keep his aunt isolated and powerless for his own financial gain. He had weaponized Julian's love for his mother against him. Julian sat alone in his office, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He had been so blinded by his own cynicism and Marcus's lies that he had become the monster. He had accused an innocent woman, humiliated her, and broken her heart. And in doing so, he had broken his mother's heart as well. An apology was not enough. Words were meaningless. He knew with absolute certainty that he had to earn her forgiveness. and that would require a gesture as grand and as genuine as the damage he had done. 2 weeks later, Emily was volunteering at Sophie's school, the Bronx Iology Center. It was her sanctuary, the one place where the ache in her heart subsided. Being surrounded by the vibrant, silent energy of the children reminded her of what truly mattered. She had returned to her waitressing job at the Ithalgard, a decision that felt both humbling and strengthening. Mr. Davies, to her surprise, had welcomed her back with a newfound respect. The story of her quiet defiance had circulated among the staff, turning her into a minor legend. The school was abuzz with excitement. A mysterious, anonymous benefactor had made a massive donation, the largest in the school's history. It was enough to not only erase their debts, but to fund the construction of a brand new arts and technology wing. Today was the official announcement assembly. As Emily helped arrange chairs in the gymnasium, a familiar black Cadillac Escalade pulled up outside. Her heart stopped. Out stepped Julian Vance. He wasn't dressed in his usual power suit, but in a simple dark sweater and trousers. He looked tired, humbled, and profoundly out of place. He didn't approach her immediately. Instead, he walked over to the school's director, Miss Albright, and spoke with her for several minutes. Miss Albright's eyes widened, and she looked from Julian to Emily and back again, a look of dawning comprehension on her face. Then Julian walked towards her. The children playing nearby fell silent, watching the tall, imposing man approach their volunteer. Emily stood her ground, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of neutrality, though her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "Emily," he began, his voice low, "I know I have no right to be here. I know that I'm sorry are just words, and words are not enough to fix what I broke." He paused, and then he did something that shocked her to her core. He lifted his hands, his movements hesitant and clumsy, but filled with a desperate sincerity. He began to sign. "I was wrong," he signed slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was clear he had been practicing drilling the movements into his memory. "I hurt you and my mother. I am so sorry." Emily stared, her anger wearing with a wave of astonishment. This man, this titan of industry who commanded boardrooms and built empires, had humbled himself to learn her language, not for his mother, but for her, to apologize in the way that would mean the most. He wasn't finished. "The man you met," he said, switching back to spoken words, "was a cynic taught to see threats in every shadow. You showed him what kindness looks like, and he was too blind to see it. Marcus, he betrayed us all. He was stealing from the foundation from schools like this one. He used your past to isolate my mother and protect his lies. He has been dealt with. He will never harm anyone again." He took a step closer. "But his actions don't excuse mine. I made a choice. I chose to believe the worst in you because it was easier than believing in the best. And that was my failing, not yours." Miss Albright stepped up to the podium on the small stage. "Students, faculty," she announced, her voice beaming, "I am honored to introduce the man responsible for our new beginning. The benefactor who has not only funded our new wing, but has also established the Sophie Petrova Grant for the Deaf Arts, a permanent scholarship to ensure our students can follow their dreams. Please welcome Mr. Julian Vance." Emily's head snapped towards him, her eyes wide with disbelief. The Sophie Petrova Grant. He hadn't just thrown money at the problem. He had seen her. He had listened to everything she had told him about her sister, about her own lost dreams, and he had honored them in the most public and permanent way imaginable. Tears finally welled in her eyes, but this time they were not of hammer or anger. Julian looked at her, his own eyes filled with a raw, pleading vulnerability. "I can't take back the accusation, Emily, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to build something better from the wreckage. My mother misses her friend, and I miss the woman who taught me that the most powerful things in the world are said without a single word." He held out his hand, not for a handshake, but as an open, hopeful gesture. "The Vance Foundation needs a new director for its outreach programs for the deaf and hard of hearing. Someone with integrity, passion, and a real understanding of the community. Someone who knows how to tend to a silent garden and make beautiful things grow." The world around them seemed to fade away. It was no longer about a billionaire and a waitress. It was about two people who had seen the worst and the best in each other. It was about a second chance, not just for forgiveness, but for a new beginning. Slowly, a small, watery smile touched Emily's lips. She looked at the hopeful faces of the children, at the promise of the new wing named for her sister, and at the man who had torn her world apart and was now trying to piece it back together better than before. She did not take his outstretched hand. Instead, she lifted her own. "Let's get to work," she signed. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the glamour. It was about the power of seeing another person's world and daring to step into it. Emily didn't just get a job or find romance. She sparked a revolution of kindness that exposed corruption and healed a family. Her story reminds us that the greatest strength often lies in the quietest gestures, and that true communication comes from the heart, not the voice. It proves that one person's empathy can truly change the world. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of understanding, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of hope and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next incredible real-life story. What was your favorite moment? Let us know in the comments below.